Thank you. Thanks Fermin for having me here to talk about architects, not architecture. And let's see if it's true, if this clicker works. I don't think it does, actually. Oh, maybe it does. First of all, I apologize for showing up to a largely visual audience with a very, very improvised presentation. Because preparing this presentation, I realized that more photos exists documenting the first 24 hours of the lives of my two sons than the first 24 years of my life. So it's a pretty sort of delicate selection. And I took the opportunity to reflect on my personal journey that got me to this state today. So where to begin? First, I thought about coming to America because actually Toshiko, that I'm incredibly sort of excited to share the stage with today, was actually the first one who invited me to come to speak at Harvard in 2006. And I almost didn't make it to the talk because I was detained at security in the airport. And it was because we had just, the Friday before, we had the opening party of my new office, Bjarke Ingels Group. And one of my friends, the photographer Peter Bohl, he had just come back from Svalbard, this Arctic island where the population of bears outnumber the humans with a factor of 3 to 1. And as a bizarre token of good luck, he gave me a bear rifle cartridge. I put it in my jacket and forgot everything about it, but I was wearing the same jacket when I went through security. And suddenly all hell broke loose, and they had to call the police. And the police officer arrived, and he told me that the minimum sentence for smuggling loaded weaponry through security at the airport was 2 weeks of prison. And I was like lamenting on the fact that I was going to teach at Harvard for the first time. It's a rather big deal for me. And I didn't intend to call Toshiko and say that I wasn't going to come because I was incarcerated. And finally, the policeman sort of told me, okay, I'm going to keep the bullet. You do the lecture, and I don't want to see you again. And I haven't seen him since. But it didn't start with America. So when Julien and I started Plot, you're going to see some incriminating photography. We ran our office out of a shared flat, and we were funding this two-person office with a shared teaching gig at the Art Academy in Copenhagen. And we'd already hired our most talented student, Thomas Christoffersen, who's one of my partners today here in New York. We had just won our first competition, and we could already feel the anxiety of the client when they realized that their jury had chosen two architects in their 20s with no built experience. So the night before the first contract negotiation meeting, I came home. We were painting our new office, and I came home, and there was like 2 big binders full of all kinds of documents to respond to the next day. And as the only native Danish speaker, because Julien is Belgian, I started sitting down at 10 p.m. Looking through these binders, and I was like way over my head. I had no understanding even of some of the terms. And suddenly my phone rings, and it's Finn Nørkjær, a 36-year-old architect who was working for the office that got the second prize in the competition. And he'd been spending the evening sort of pondering over the competition brief, and he was like fascinated by our proposal. It was like a kind of circular swimming pool turned inside out. And he looked my name up in the phone book, and I'm the only Bjarke Ingels. So he called, and with 10 years of experience, in my mind, he might as well have been the oldest architect on the planet. So I sort of asked him, where do you live? No, he lived 5 minutes away. And so can you come over? And he did. And you know, we ended up sitting on until 3 a.m. in the morning, and he was like somehow finding all the little the little sort of traps they had created. Like they basically wanted to sort of demonstrate without a doubt that we didn't have the experience to run this project. He couldn't come with us the next day, but when he came home to his wife, his wife later told me that she was putting their daughter to bed at 10 p.m. And then she came down, and there was a note that said, like, I went for a walk. And then when he came home, she woke up and he said, like, I think I quit my job to start with these two new guys from scratch. So Finn is another one of my partners that I've been working with for the last 25 years. But the story of Plot and the story of Big is very much a story populated by the body of work. So to go through that story in the absence of the projects would be a little bit like walking blindly through the last quarter of a decade. So I came to think, the watercolor house, I did manage to sneak in a few pictures. So I came to think of a conversation I had with the king of Bhutan this Christmas. He's a young man who was handed over the throne by his father in his early 20s, and over the last year he became a very dear friend of mine. And he told me about the 4 phases of life. The first phase, the first quarter of your life, you grow, you learn, and you become who you are. The second quarter, you build your platform in life. You assemble your team and you own your craft. The third quarter, you use that platform to give the world what you have to offer. And the fourth and final quarter, you come to terms with the inevitable. So I was born in 1974. I turned 50 this year, which is why I need notes to remember and I need glasses to see what I wrote. So I'm roughly half through the journey, pending, of course, dietary and lifestyle choices. But that means that I can speak with experience of the first 2 quarters, and I can share some of the questions and doubts I have about the third quarter that I'm about to begin. But given the time constraints today, I'm going to focus on the first quarter. So basically, my personal evolutionary journey up until the foundation of Plot in the beginning of 2000. So probably the least documented part of my formation as an architect. And I thought the logical place to begin would be with my first memory. My first memory, I'm sitting in the back of my grandparents' Morris Minor 1000 on the checkered blanket in the back. I'm with my sister and my grandparents. We're driving along the beach in Amager, the island that constitutes half of Copenhagen. It's the sort of the lesser half on the wrong side of the tracks or the wrong side of the port. And I don't have any concept who my grandparents are, except that they're like these very loving people and important people in my life at the time. And we drive to this modern building, tall ceiling, large windows, floor to ceiling glass. And when we look out, we can see airplanes. And suddenly the most beautiful woman I've ever seen shows up, and she's like smiling and laughing, and she picks me up and kisses me, and I realize this is my mother. And I've since learned and understood that when I was 2, my parents went on a 1-month trip around the world, and they left me and my sister with my grandparents. And when they left me, I couldn't say a word, and when they came back a month later, I would not stop talking. So as I did, I came to the theory that as I developed the ability to speak, to put words together to convey meaning, and to receive and store meaning, I somehow also developed consciousness. So maybe no coincidence that the kind of emotional impact of being reunited with my parents, combined with this kind of newfound faculty of communication and thought, has led to the formation of my first memory. A memory that, as it happens, took place in one of the most modern buildings in Copenhagen in 1976, the Willem Lauritsen terminal at SAS. When I was 3, my house burned down to the ground. It was a 1960s cigar box. The oil heater malfunctioned, and the whole place was swallowed by fire. But by a miracle, my sister and I had the night before begged my parents to stay with my grandparents, and we were spared the nightmares that since then haunted my parents for decades. And as a result, I was completely unfazed by the whole thing. The most memorable thing was actually, there you have the most beautiful woman in the world. But the roof was gone from the house, and only the walls were standing, so almost like a maze without a ceiling. And the rain had covered the chevron floors in water, soaking them so they inflated, and they started buckling out of the ground, and they created this kind of timber dune landscape, roughly the head height of a 3-year-old. So the fire had almost transformed my childhood home into this kind of fairy tale landscape of hills and valleys. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of weird photos. When I was 5, I started kindergarten at Vedbæk Public School. And at the daycare after school, there was like this young assistant, Søren, who would mesmerize all the kids by sitting all day and making drawings for us and telling stories of what he was drawing. And more than anyone, I was captivated at this kind of magical ability to turn a blank piece of paper with gray crayons into this kind of treasure chest of the imagination. So I'd almost say like my favorite days were the days when my mom would pick me up very late, because I would be the last kid in school, and I would end up sitting the last hour alone with Søren and sort of dive into all the drawings. And it quickly became clear that my love for drawings exceeded that of my fellow classmates. And I think it kind of gave me an anchor in life, because it meant that I never had to compete with anyone, not in sports or in school or in life, because I knew that my gift, my destiny was in drawing, where I was unlike anyone else. And it also opened my eyes to graphic novels, and of course like a passion that has influenced not just my childhood, but also my career. But I also sort of discovered, the French and the Belgians, Franquin Thomé, Jean Giraud and his alter ego Mobius. And then sort of as I grew up, I discovered the Italians, Liberatore and Milo Manara and Hugo Pratt. And finally the dark realism of Frank Miller in The Dark Knight and Sin City. And back then I would spend hours in the local bookstore when my mother was doing the shopping, perusing the graphic novels, making sure that the shop attendant wouldn't notice that I was trying to read all the graphic novels without actually buying them. And once in a while, when I'd saved up enough money, I would make a sort of very well-researched choice and buy one of them. But the disappointment would never fail, because the actual story, once I finally got to read it, could never live up to the imagined wonders of only looking at the imagery. Somehow the imagination, the expectation of not fully knowing outshined the reality every time. When I was 15, I went to public high school in Hellerup. And each year you had to do a mini thesis. The final year I wrote my thesis in political science, which was my major. And this was January 1993. Gro Harlem Brundtland had just published the Brundtland Report, where she coined the term sustainable development. And it was clear that the world was about to mobilize in the face of oncoming environmental disaster. Global warming and the hole in the ozone layer were competing to be the most scary dystopian vision of the future. And I chose to follow up on UN's environmental conference in Rio in 1992 to understand, and this was my title, Environmental Policy and Action at the Global, Regional, National, Local, and Individual Level. Probably one of the least elegant titles ever. But nonetheless, it gave me a timely insight in the state of the planet in early 1993. And as you know today, the hole in the ozone layer actually started closing itself as soon as we stopped using Freon as propellants in aerosols. But we are still only getting started to deal with climate change. So I basically left university, for university, fully versed in the condition of the climate crisis. And of course, this kind of attention to climate ended up also in informing our work and how we sort of approach the projects. In high school, a friend of mine introduces me to William Gibson's Neuromancer, and I never had great interest in science fiction, or fiction for that matter, because I always thought that there's so much interesting real knowledge in the world. Why would you waste your time reading something that people just made up for fun? But I found in Gibson's Neuromancer trilogy and all the subsequent works, is one of the few authors where I read everything he wrote, the wisdom that he's captured better than anyone else. The idea that the future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. The idea that today holds the traces of tomorrow, somewhere in labs or on laptops or in the model workshops, design studios, are the prototypes that will constitute the world of tomorrow. So Gibson was almost like an archaeologist digging for the future in the present. And my passion for science fiction led me to discover Ian M. Banks, Kim Stanley Robinson. Actually, my claim to fame is that I am mentioned in New York 2140 because Kim Stanley Robinson refers to Bjarke's wall, the dry line to protect Manhattan from the inevitable flood. And in the book, it only delayed the inevitable flood with a few decades. And eventually, Philip K. Dick. And I think Philip K. Dick's definition of science fiction beautifully explain why, as a genre or a creative experiment, science fiction transcends the boundaries of literature and is very relevant for architects. He said, science fiction is not a story from the future, although it often happens in the future. It's also not a space opera, although it often takes place in space. It's a story where the plot is triggered by some form of invention. Often it's a technological invention, but it can also be a cultural, social, environmental, political innovation. And the story unfolds as a narrative pursuit of the potential consequences cascading from this one invention. And not only the writer, but also the reader can speculate along and sort of explore this idea. And essentially, I believe that our best work as architects happen when we manage to ask one question, modify one of the givens, and suddenly the design process becomes the design exploration of all the cascading consequences of that one single altered fact. So when I leave high school at the age of 18, I know I want to become a cartoonist, but there is no cartoon academy in Copenhagen. So I end up enrolling in the Royal Danish Art Academy School of Architecture. My professor and personal mentor becomes Jens Thomas Arnfred, a hippie-turned communal housing pioneer. And he was like full of absurd but also great statements like, it doesn't matter what it costs as long as it looks cheap. And he opens the semester with a speech saying that he doesn't care what we learn at school. He doesn't care if we read this or that, or if we acquire this or that skill. He says all we have to promise him is that when we leave the school, we will leave with something at heart. Because it doesn't matter what you can do if you don't know what you want to do with it. And the Art Academy at the time was so free that it was free from classes and it was free from grades. Essentially, all you got was a key card to the buildings and a library card. And that basically gave you 24-hour access and all the books at your disposal. And in a way, my curriculum became the reverse engineering of different architects' heritage by simply tracing all the footnotes in all the interviews and all the essays. So I randomly end up discovering Le Corbusier via Rem Koolhaas, via Zaha Hadid, via Ben van Berkel. So you can say my academic trajectory becomes like serial monogamy, that I fall deeply in love with the work of an architect. I dive as deeply as possible until the deep dives sends me to discover their influences, their past loves. And when I tell people that I started studying architecture, the exchange often goes like this. So I say architecture, and they say, actor. And then I say, no, architecture. And they say, okay, architecture. Then perhaps you can tell me why all modern buildings are so boring. And I gradually realized that my new profession has not managed to capture the imagination of contemporary culture. On the first month of architecture school, I go to Barcelona. And I fall in love with the city, I fall in love with Gaudi, I fall in love with Miralles, Coderch, Bofill. And I basically had no idea that architecture could actually be this free and expressive. The roofscapes of Gaudi are like inhabitable graphic novels. Rather than the framework of fiction, they constitute the framework of our lives. And I decide that I want to return to the city, and 3 years later I do at the age of 21. This is my little brother, by the way. And it's kind of fun because like, he's 11 years younger than me, so he was almost more like a son than a brother to me. And I constantly confuse the name Jacob with the name Darwin and the name Leo, even though that Jacob by now is like 37 years old, and Darwin is 5, and Leo is 4 months. Basically because I think they sit in the same place in the heart. So when I moved to Barcelona, I end up living with a philosopher who introduces me to Deleuze and Guattari, Nietzsche, Manuel de Landa, Charles Darwin, and Deleuze's encouragement to speak and write like a foreigner in your own tongue becomes exacerbated by the fact that I'm actually learning Spanish at the time, a Latin language that is quite different from my native Danish, which is Germanic in root. So the fact that I have to struggle to formulate the simplest sentences ends up being an asset rather than a handicap, because it allows me that I have to understand things at the most fundamental level, because everything has to be distilled into first principle or essences. I can't just skate over things that you can do when your language is second nature. And I'm also isolated. I'm also isolated from my native habitat. In 1996, there were no cheap flights. There were no free Zoom calls. And my father, who was an optic fiber engineer, he was the only person I knew in the world who had an email address. So as a result, I was effectively isolated from communicating with anyone, except my dad. And I believe somehow that each time you change your environment, it offers you the freedom to evolve in leaps. Your friends and family, of course, is your greatest source of love and strength, but they also keep you in place. They've known you forever, and their expectations and their preformed ideas of who and what you are will keep you in that place. So when I arrived in Barcelona, people saw me and met me with fresh eyes, free of expectation or prejudice. And when I returned to Denmark a year later, I could return as who I had become while I was away. And the separation left an opening for my friends and colleagues and teachers to meet me anew. On a trip to San Sebastian, a friend of mine gives me Douglas Coupland's Generation X. So it's an amazing book where he describes the mindset of contemporary Western culture anchored in his experiences from the Pacific Northwest. Like a pop artist of literature, he would select seemingly mundane elements out of the everyday and elevate them to extract meaning. The idea that you could find meaning in the mundane or beauty in mediocrity was a great revelation to me. At the Art Academy, architects would typically design artist residences on edges of cliffs in beautiful nature, like little gems adorning stunning landscapes. And here comes Douglas Coupland reminding us that life is actually what happens when we're busy making other plans, and the world we live in is the world we live in while we're busy dreaming of somewhere else. And through Douglas Coupland, I also discover an interview. I actually managed to become really good friends with Douglas because I made a shout out to him in a room in Vancouver, which is where he's from. And the next day I confessed my love for his books. And the next day I receive an email from Douglas inviting me for dinner the next time I'm in town. So I definitely encourage everybody to always say who you admire, because they might be listening. And this is William Gibson, who also lives in Vancouver. So through Douglas Coupland, I discover an interview that Douglas did with Koolhaas. And I'd already stumbled upon Koolhaas many times, of course, but I always found the aesthetic too awkward, the collage-like character maybe too unresolved in a way. But now I see it again, and I see something else. I read Delirious New York, one of the most brilliant books I've ever read. Each sentence is essentially like an aphorism so saturated with meaning. I managed to find the first edition of SML in a bookstore in Amsterdam. I dig through the DVDs at the Barcelona library, where they had videotaped old lectures with Rem, explaining his urban projects, explaining how analysis can be a creative process and how different societal processes shape the city. So frustrated with the classes that I have in Barcelona with Miralles, I feel the intellectual discourse, in this case, it was Guy Debord and the Society of the Spectacle, is used in an almost ornamental way to attach words to forms that are otherwise unrelated. And in my frustration, I find a group of like-minded German, Swedish, and Danish architects and students, and we submit a competition proposal for the master plan of a new neighborhood in Copenhagen University. In the hectic process of the deadline, we end up discarding one of the main boards, the one containing the master plan itself. It simply was too ugly. And we make a statement about how the plan is never seen. It's the concept and ideas that it contains that will shape the neighborhood. And I make little cartoons depicting the life in the city. We almost murder each other in the process of submitting. I swear I'm never going to work with these people again. Against all odds, we are chosen for the second round, and we're given the dizzying sum of 70,000 euros, which was practically the national budget of Denmark at the time, to submit stage 2. In our isolation in Barcelona, we can actually maintain the illusion that we are real architects doing real work. We rent the space underneath the roof terrace of Miralles' old office. The tension in the group only gets worse. And when we finally lose the second round, it feels like a pardon rather than a punishment. And actually, out of the original group, one became an academic, one became an exhibition designer, one became a filmmaker, and Frederick became a comedian. When I return to Copenhagen, I'm on fire. It feels like the penny has dropped. It feels like my 22nd year in Barcelona was the year I became who I am. There's only one path ahead of me. I have to go and work with Koolhaas. So I spent the whole Christmas making my portfolio. And anyone who's ever made a portfolio knows that it's this kind of excruciating process of making like work you did 4 years ago look like it's actually good. From the credit pages of El Croquis, I know the names of some of the main people at OMA. So when I show up unannounced the 2nd of January in the reception, I mentioned Christoph Kroneberg. No one knows where he is. And I later find out that he had actually abandoned OMA that Christmas to never return. So in my second attempt, I mentioned Gary Bates. And he's there and he shows up. He's annoyed. He doesn't recall having ever spoken with me, which he makes very clear, and it's also true because we never spoke. And he says, you know, you can't come here without an appointment. And he grabs my portfolio and he starts criticizing it. But he also starts inquiring about the work, and eventually he sends me off with the job to start February 1st. On my first day of work, I'm sent to the model shop to help on the competition model for the IIT's Student Center. I don't leave the office for another 72 hours. The design is a sort of deconstructed mise. And I meet this young kid. His name is Julien de Smet. He's orchestrating all the little resin gem pieces that populate the open plan of the building. And it's obviously my future co-founder of Plot. And it becomes the beginning of a great and impactful personal and professional friendship. I later work on the design of the Seattle Library, and I meet Beat Schenk, another dear friend and partner of mine today, who I started the New York office with. 2.5 years later, Julien and I quit to start Plot, and by doing so, we initiate the second quarter of my journey, one that I'll save for another talk. I do realize that stopping here is a little bit like the experience I had in 2021 when I went to the premiere of Dune, and when he finally meets the Fremen, the movie ends. But if Villeneuve can do it, so can I. But maybe just to sum up big in a single sentence, we're here today to give form to the future. And as I've explained many times, the Danish word for design is form giving, because when you design something, you are giving form to that which has not yet been given form. In other words, you're giving form to the future. And I believe that our work has been one long pursuit and reconciliation of seemingly contradictory elements into new hybrids. The architectural pursuit of oxymorons, starting with our first discovery of hedonistic sustainability when we opened the Harbor Bath, our first project in 2001. We were watching the Copenhageners jump in the clean port rather than driving for hours to get to the beaches in the north of Copenhagen. And we realized that the sustainable city is not only better for the environment, it can also be much more enjoyable for the people that live in it, hedonistic sustainability. And essentially, we've pursued oxymorons. Copenhagen is a power plant that's so clean that you can ski on the roof and climb the facade. The 8 House is a hybrid between a city block and a mountainous neighborhood. Sluishuis is a courtyard, where the courtyard is actually a marina in the port of Amsterdam. The Court Scraper is a hybrid combining the social space of the Copenhagen courtyard with the density and verticality of an American high-rise. Kistefos is a bridge and a museum and a sculpture and a sculpture park. And finally, the spiral combines the pre-modern ziggurat with the kind of glass monolith of modernity. And as we've evolved from a duo to a partnership to a team of 700 people, we've gone through a similar evolution as an organization to what I've gone through as an individual before I started it. And maybe just to conclude, I just celebrated the 50th birthday of my partners, David Sahle, and the 60th birthday of Finn Nørkjær. And when I toasted for them, I realized that I've known them exactly half my life. And we just opened a building in the port of Copenhagen that we built for ourselves. It sits in a public park we've designed around it. And actually today, the American artist Benjamin Langhorst just finished installing his sculpture. That's going to be ready for when the park opens this summer. And when we opened it last fall, it gave me this sensation that we have graduated into like what started as an augmented individual, essentially into a creative movement that I feel like could play a role in giving form to our future for a long time. So in a way, to conclude, you can almost say that when I was a kid, I drew with crayons and watercolors. And at the Art Academy, I had to learn how to draw with rulers and hard lines. So I lost some of the feeling I had with the crayons, but I gained a new world of possibility to construct multi-point perspectives and measurable isometrics. Then I got a computer, and I learned to draw with a mouse. And I lost the tactility of the drawing, but I gained a new world of possibilities with 3D models, material mapping, daylight settings, texture and space. And today I draw with people. I have 700 brilliant, beautiful people to work with. I've lost the control of always holding the crayon myself, but I've gained a world of possibility by engaging with all these powerful, thoughtful, sensible, sensitive form givers. And for the next 25 years, we will formulate together what will be the gifts that we have to offer the world now that we are here, finally.
Always when thinking of you, someone has the feeling that you're always on the run, always busy, always time is tight. Does it feel that way for you? That you are always in the run?
I mean, of course, there's a few things to do, and I have to say that having 2 boys has definitely not cleared up my calendar. But I think I think I function quite well with the idea of being fully present in the moment, in the situation at hand, and fully absent everywhere else at the same time. So that in a way, I don't have a hard time switching, which means that I don't get stressed. If I lie down, I fall asleep. So in that sense, I think it works.
But even, I haven't seen interviews or rarely interviews of you complaining about how it is, how it works with being an architect. But now, Ryan,
no, it's clearly a self-inflicted wound, right? So,
where do you feel the biggest pressures come from, or what makes you feel the biggest pressure?
I think at the end of the day, you do. You are probably your own harshest critic, and in that sense, I think like in some way you can say that the work you do is almost like a logarithmic curve rising towards a vertical tangent, which is the perfect building, perfect idea, perfect concept, perfect execution, perfect details.
Never reached.
And you'll never reach it, right? But somehow the thrill and frustration of trying to get there is really the reward. And I would always say that those moments where an uncrackable nut suddenly opens up and you sort of see that this is the project. That's the greatest drug on earth. Always
when thinking of you and thinking of how the office has been, and you are 50, but it's still 50 for an architect is young. You're still young, Bjarke, don't worry.
I am 49, by the way.
Yeah, this year at some point.
I'm in my late 40s.
But wonder, I had the question and I forgot it. But what do you feel is the biggest price that you have to pay to be Bjarke, but because it's not that easy. I mean, the whole process that it has been done during those decades of work, of projects, traveling, big practice, big stress, everything. So, I don't know. I think maybe one thing that I've been struggling with lately, and I think it's something that comes at the end of the second quarter, right? At the beginning of the third, is that
your self-perception never changes, right? So in the beginning, and I really understand when you see some of these photos that when we started, there was like a lot of attention associated with our youth, right? And somehow in your mindset, and Toshiko will testify to this, I imagine, you never really change. Like, of course, you learn a lot. You discover things you didn't know, but somehow your perception of yourself is pretty constant. I would say, in my case, since I was 22. But the world starts seeing you differently, and in the beginning they're rooting for the young challenger, but eventually they start like booing at what they see as the establishment. And it's not because you've become settled or established or even sort of tired of mind. It's just simply that you've been around for 25 years, and I think that, and I mean, it's almost like I came to understand that, in the Dark Knight, the Nolan movie, Two-Face says like you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself turn into a villain, and I always thought that it was this idea that power corrupts or whatever. But I think it's more true in general that just simply by being in the game for a long time, like you are perceived as establishment, and we are 700 people, so we do have a body of work. So in that sense, there is some kind of tuning of your self-perception, and I think there's I think there is a lot of harsh, uninformed opinions that you also have to learn to take at a certain distance, and I think eventually, I think the harshness of the criticism isn't bad per se, even if it is often very uninformed, but at least it obligates you to be extra thoughtful and careful about your motivations and about your actions, and then you just have to forgive the ignorant that they don't know and they speak before they think, right? But I think that's been a journey that has taken a little bit of effort, because it requires that you simply look upon yourself in a different way.
I wonder if other architects kind of took you to side, like Renkuldas, if you meet like, oh, now you get into somehow the establishment, I'm going to tell you a couple of things that might happen to you.
No,
and you know that at the beginning, like you say, you're young, doing great projects, people celebrate you, but at some point, people start to be skeptical.
All right, at some point, like Renzo Piano said, the world will never forget you for having an early career. So there is something, but I could definitely use a one-on-one with some of the legends.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, that's open a whole topic, but something that I wanted to ask you regarding the process of Bjarke Ingels and big architects is that you also faced moments where it was not easy at all, and I mean, like with moment you had to hire the CEO Sheila, trying to help to run the business a bit better, and so Sheila Sogard, quoting her, she turned idealism into good business, and you say about her that where architects are typically overly optimistic, Sheila has a healthy skepticism. And my question is, do architects have too much idealism and forget about the proper way to run a business sometimes? But we see that around quite often.
I mean, of course, that definitely happens. I mean, I think, like in a way, you need the business to be healthy in order to be able to provide for the office. And you need the people to help you do the work, right? But I think often what also happens, so you can see there's definitely endless examples of architects going bankrupt, but there's also endless examples of architects going corporate, and you always have to remember why you started the studio, and you didn't start the studio to make money, because there are definitely careers where there's a more direct path to that. You started the studio because you had dreams of giving form to the future, right? So in that sense, I think I've always kept it very clear that we make architectural decisions in the company. Of course, it needs to run and it needs to endure, so we can be around. But I would say the few times we've tried to make business decisions, they actually turned out to be bad business and not great architecture. And actually, whenever we really invest, like for instance, 2 years ago, in a sort of realizing that I was reaching the end of my 40s, I finally confessed a kind of bucket list of a series of projects that I would want to do before I die. And it was a very banal list, concert hall, opera house, airport, library, National Museum. And in making that list, I also suggested that we would be willing to risk 25% of our annual earnings in over-investing in securing these jobs, simply by putting more energy into it, more people, more investment, and simply by making the choice. We never ended up over-investing that much, but maybe we over-invested 5% instead of 25%. But simply having said out loud what the ambition was, and by throwing resources and focus after it, we ended up actually ticking every single box on the bucket list in 2 years after 20 years of trying, right? So in some way, I do think that when we lead with our hearts and as architects, that's when we make the best business sense.
My question was more, that's very interesting, but my question was more focused on, it feels like sometimes architects tend to have problems by delegating some tasks at having a business, running a business or running a practice, because that takes a lot of time of the creative time.
No, for sure. No, but I actually Sheila was actually my second hire as I started hiring a CFO before her for 2 years. And by delegating all of the finances to him and trusting a lot, the company almost ran into the ground until I realized that he actually didn't have things under control. So there's also the thing about delegation is that it's not a question of just simply handing it over and closing your eyes. It's actually thoughtfully and wisely handing it over. It's a bit like it's a bit like raising a child in a sense that if you just let the child run on the beach, it's going to drown, right? But so you have to be quite thoughtful about making sure there's support enough, and eventually it runs on its own. So, but for sure, during Plot and the first 5 years of 5 years of Big, I was or maybe the 3 years of Big, I was the CEO myself. And it was definitely not my dream to run a company. I wanted to, design buildings.
Last question, and with a very short answer. It's going to be an easy one, no problem. What does Bjarke love to do when it's not working or thinking about architecture?
I actually realized that a lot of the influences that ended up in my talk were not architectural, but actually from the world of fiction. I think that's a huge resource. Like in some way, I until I turned 30, I never spent time on fiction because it was like wasting your time on stupid shit that someone made up. And after my 30s, I really came to see it as an incredible and almost infinite resource, right? Because essentially architecture is turning fiction into fact. But I would say that maybe the last 5 years, a substantial part of my time actually goes with Darwin and now Leo. Because that's been maybe the greatest gift. Just to add a little bit what Toshiko said, I always thought it was an etymological misnomer that we use the word love for, like, I love my wife, I love my girlfriend, I love my children, I love my parents, because clearly they're not the same meaning, right? Except when I had Darwin, I realized, and now again with Leo, that the love a parent feels for his or her child is exactly the kind of warm, passionate love that you feel for, when you are the most in love with your girlfriend, and it sounds wrong, but it isn't.
Yeah, I mean, it's only your brother, right?
No, exactly. It's
Bjarke, thank you a lot for the talk. We are going to have now a break for about 20 minutes. Thank you.